welcome to the UnLearn show, where we talk about breaking bad habits with a purpose. We are stoked to have you be a part of our show, but most of our audience might know you and some of them may not know you. Would you mind just giving a little bit of an introduction about yourself, especially your success on LinkedIn? Don't forget that piece of it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and thanks for being here.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad to be here. A lot of my friends have been on the show, so definitely when you guys reached out, this is super exciting for me. To kind of give you some background, I just graduated a couple weeks ago from USC. Sort of in terms of my LinkedIn journey, I started writing on the platform maybe 3 years ago. I started as actually like an internship where I was ghostwriting for the CEO, and she was like, yeah, I don't really like these articles. You can post them on your LinkedIn if you want. And it was kind of by chance that I started to really enjoy talking about different things on the platform and kind of how we work and some of the struggles that we went through, but also kind of some of my revelations that I had, especially going through college, just some experiences that I was having for the first time. And so I started writing about that. And in 2015, I was recruited to be one of the first LinkedIn campus editors, which for people that don't know, basically it's this job where you represent your school and you go to different classrooms in your school, you go to different colleges, and you speak about how those students can use LinkedIn. So you give a lot of profile reviews, you talk about articles, stuff like that. So I started to do that in 2015. And I started to really sort of explore some topics that students were struggling with. A lot of my articles honestly just came from conversations that I was having with my roommates and some things that they would say, and it kind of made me question a little bit. So I would write an article about it. And so I've kind of been documenting a lot of sort of my conversations that I've had, some struggles that I've had throughout college on LinkedIn. I stopped being a campus editor last year. Because I ended up actually studying abroad in Hong Kong. So that's kind of why that ended. But I still am writing very much in the platform. And now we've kind of seen this, kind of revamp of the LinkedIn community, which I don't think anybody has missed out on. It's not really any news that I'm telling you guys, but kind of seeing that revamp has kind of gotten me back into creating more content. And really starting to develop kind of my why I was creating content in the first place, especially since I kind of fell into it. I was starting to find out more that I was really passionate about finding sort of these underrepresented voices, these conversations that were really challenging the norms, and starting to create content on those. So to this day, I'm still writing content.
That's awesome. Now, one of the other co-hosts might walk back in your past, but I'm very curious. I mean, you went to 200,000 followers before graduating college, okay? So what's your process of keeping your ego out of it and, like you're talking about, continuing to add value that is true to you?
That's a really good question. I struggled with that really hardcore early this year. Especially since there was kind of this revamp, and I came back from Hong Kong and there was like all of these creators that were like, oh my God, Natalie, like you have all these followers, da-da-da. And I got a lot of questions about that number. And I kind of struggled with that because people weren't asking like, oh, like I really liked this piece, or, oh, I thought it was interesting you said that. They were literally like, how do I get to that number? Tell me the growth hacks. What did you do? What's your audience? Who do you go after? And that kind of like made me question a little bit of like why I was doing things, because it made me really focus on my vanity metrics and really focus on that follower count. And like even just a couple days ago, I hit 300,000, and there was a question of me where I was like, yes, I should be proud of myself of, I've been able to build a community, but that number means nothing if I'm not impacting people. And I've been fortunate enough to have people message me. My like all-time favorite message was this one guy who interviewed me. And afterwards he was like, yeah, I showed the interview to my daughter. She printed out a photo of you and it's now hanging on her wall as like inspiration. And I was like, that is the cutest thing I've ever heard. But I think also growing up as a YouTube kid, like I was obsessed with YouTube. And for me, it wasn't necessarily like I watched YouTubers that had a big following, but I saw YouTubers that I could empathize with and represented ideas that I did not grow up with. And I think I kind of go back to that and think like, if I could be that for somebody, like that gives me so much contentment. So I think I have to go back to like the impact I'm making on certain individuals and not necessarily the audience as a whole.
Is there like a
So I have
certain
two.
process? Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Go ahead, Shana. Good.
No, girl, you're up.
Yeah.
Take it. Okay, going. Two-part question. First question. I am obsessed with marketing too. So, and I see that you've been, you know, super social media focused since YouTube, right? I want to know how you got into that and why you were so in love with it, and how you, second part of the question, stayed so focused through college and being a full-time student and getting all of this work done. Like, what was driving you through that?
Yeah, so first part of the question, social media. It's interesting because growing up in LA, I like hated social media influencers because they're everywhere here. And I was just like, oh, they're so annoying. And they're so like, they disrupt the peace. They come in with their pranks and I hated it. And so I was always really kind of anti-social media. And even I was on another podcast and they were like, why don't you have a lot of Instagram followers? And I was like, because I never viewed myself as an Instagrammer. Like I just didn't view myself as like a social media person. But I really like, kind of going back to what I said, I really liked the impact and sort of the democratization that social media had when it came to representation, how you could find people that you identified with really easily. And so I think I liked the business side of it. So I took it from a very like intellectual route where I was like, I'm not an Instagram model, but if I can help that, you know, woman of color Instagram model gain more followers and allow for other people to find her and allow people to identify with her, that's really cool. So that's kind of the approach that I took with it, was like this very intellectual, like I'll be the business side. And I still do that to this day, right? Like I still work in entertainment in LA and I still do influencer marketing. But then when it came to the LinkedIn stuff, that was very much something I fell into. And even to this day, like I struggle with the word influencer, like LinkedIn influencer, just because I view, and I think this is true about LinkedIn in general, LinkedIn is much more community than the other platforms in terms of how I feel about it, where it doesn't necessarily feel like this one person preaching to a bunch of people, like this is what you should do, but more of a conversation. That's when I really started to like fall in love with social media. Second question, the student thing. Yeah, that was a struggle. So like last semester, I had 3 jobs and was a full-time student and averaged like 4 hours of sleep a night. And like, that was like me like pushing my limits. Like I realized after last semester, like get more sleep, like eat better, get more sleep. I think that for me, and I haven't really talked about this a lot with my content. I was like painfully shy in high school, like painful. Like people didn't know I was in their classes at the end of the year, kind of painful. And I think when I went to college, I went through this like really bad breakup. And one of the things that was said was like, Natalie, sometimes you act like Mark Zuckerberg from the Social Network. Like you're so inward facing that you don't necessarily understand the impact that you're having outwardly. And obviously that's one of those comments that you like, you know, saying you're Mark Zuckerberg is one of those like flippant comments you say in a breakup. But I think it was really transformative for me when I heard that, because I think I realized that I was spending so much time looking inward that I wasn't being proactive and wasn't actually putting my thoughts into action. And that was like the real kickstart for me to actually go and start doing a lot of stuff like in work and stuff, and start being really active in my community. So like in college, I ran like a tech incubator at USC, and that was my way of being really involved in school and whatnot. I think I just realized that I had a lot of thoughts, but not a lot of actions. And that's kind of what pushed me to work so much in college.
So that's really interesting, because I was kind of wondering where your passion came from for like representing underrepresented voices, is kind of what you said. And it seems like maybe it was kind of centered around this one like defining moment that happened in this breakup. Like, okay, I'm not using my voice enough. There's other people who aren't using their voices as well. I'm kind of putting your words in your mouth, but
no, you got it.
and I'm like channeling myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's kind of like me. But so what do you think is the biggest lesson that you've learned either through yourself or through these people who you are communicating their stories that have had the most impact?
That's a really good question. It actually, my answer to that comes not actually from my LinkedIn content, but when I was a journalist in college. So I also did journalism on US-China relations. And one of the big things was we were trained on like how to do interviews, right? And it's an interesting thing because I'm white, right? So I'm like speaking with all these people about Chinese culture, and I'm asking them all these like really intellectual questions. And one time I got this really great piece of advice, and my editor was like, Natalie, you have to realize this is their culture, not yours. Like, I know you want to steer the conversation and you want to know certain things, but it's better to just be quiet and let somebody else describe their own culture than for you to sit there and try to microanalyze it through your lens. And I think that was a really important lesson for me, especially when it comes to like the workplace and when you hear other people's opinions. Sometimes you have to sit and let people talk about their opinion or how they want to do things from their perspective and not try to microanalyze it from how you normally think. So I think that was probably the biggest lesson I learned. I'm trying to translate that into my LinkedIn content as well. But I think I felt that especially when I was talking about very like cultural oriented issues.
So Natalie, I know in your content before, you've actually talked about anxiety being something that's been a big issue for you to just kind of work through, which is, it's so interesting because you've done all these things at a young age and with all this stuff going on with school. And it almost seems like that would be the opposite with seeing all the things you've done, that anxiety is not an issue for you. So just tell us a little bit more about what that's been like for you and how you've kind of pushed through it to, like you said, act instead of just think.
Yeah, so that has been a huge part of my college experience, has been dealing with anxiety and learning to deal with anxiety. My freshman year, especially, I like really struggled with that, where like I would like miss classes and like that like really was a very crippling part of sort of my condition. I think that for me, my biggest trigger with my anxiety is actually not doing enough. So you kind of see that with my career of like, I'm always doing a million things. And some of that is pushed by my anxiety of saying like, you're not being what you could be. So you, especially because I'm very grateful, but I grew up in a family where I didn't necessarily have to worry about my next meal. I had a lot of privileges in terms of, I wasn't like super wealthy, but I didn't necessarily have to worry. I didn't have to overcome a lot of things. So I think that because of that, with my anxiety, I felt a lot of guilt that like, if I'm messing up, it is like all me. Like I do not have anything that I'm overcoming. It is all because like I'm being lazy or something, And so I think that with it, having a certain amount of work is really something that drives me and brings me a lot of content and helps me reduce my anxiety. Having too much work obviously does not. And I think the ultimate sort of equilibrium was where I was having a lot of contentful work, but I was also taking care of my body. So like last semester, that's where I struggled, where I wasn't necessarily taking care of my body. Like I know I need to work out 4 times a week at least. Like I just know from like a physical anxiety standpoint, if I don't work out, my anxiety is going to build up. I have to have outlets that are outside of work that I'm able to get that through. And so I think that it's one of those things where there's a really complex relationship between anxiety and success, right? Especially the type of anxiety that I have, where anxiety a lot of times will push you and it'll make you work really hard. And there's a good level of anxiety where you have it because you want to do well. And then there's the dangerous level, and it's like the thinnest line I've ever seen of what's good and what's dangerous. But I think that it's one of those things where I've never wanted to say I never want to have no anxiety. Like, I don't want to rid myself completely of anxiety, because I know a little bit's good, and that's why I've tried to be involved and not steered away from opportunities. But at the end of the day, like sleeping, eating well, exercising, if it's going into those sort of 3 key areas, and I would say social as well, then it's not necessarily worth it. So I've tried to find that equilibrium. It's a constant flux. Some days I feel like I got it. Some days I feel like I don't got it, but we're always still learning. And so that's kind of how I've been able to manage the 2 kind of forces.
So what do you tell yourself when you're not ready to act?
When I'm not ready to, sorry, say that again?
To act, because you said action or doing things is what should keep you forward. So what's that conversation with Natalie like?
Yeah, so that's a tough conversation, because I think I'm very much like a yes woman, where I'm like, yeah, of course I'll do that. Yeah, I'll definitely take on everything. And I think there kind of comes a point early on when I was dealing with my anxiety, I would have to like break in order to realize that like I needed to take a step back kind of thing. I think you break enough where then you're like, let's just not break anymore. Let's just keep it together for like 2 minutes. And I think the conversation really goes into, if I take on this next project, is that going to lower my ability to do all my other things? Like, is that going to affect my overall being in such a way where I can't necessarily give my 100% to the things that I'm doing? And if I don't feel like I'm able to maintain the other things, that's when I really have to say no. And I have to say, I can't act on this right now. And sometimes that sucks. And I think the one thing that I'm really trying to improve on right now is being able to say no in such a way that doesn't close the door indefinitely, but just says like genuinely, hey, I can't do this right now. Ask me again in a couple months. So that's something I'm currently working on, but I think that's sort of the conversation of, is this going to hinder the other things that I'm involved in? Because I never want to do something unless it's 100%.
Wow. So you've said a lot about yourself, which normally it's the other way around. People talk about the ideas and the concepts. So I'm going to take it back to your writing.
Awesome.
Full of articles, because that's it, right? That's where you share. You've talked about a couple of things, both on the show and in your writing. You talked about anxiety. You talked about culture, so global culture. And there's something in one of your articles, I think, about the American ego, where you reference the man's world. So I want you to give us your revelation of those, and it can be each one of them if you want to. What are things that you had to unlearn, because it's the UnLearn show. What did you have to unlearn along the way to overcome those 3 specific topics for you?
Yeah, so I think to start off with anxiety, I think with anxiety, the thing that I had to unlearn that I was taught a lot was, so I grew up, my dad is Italian American, and there's kind of this like family culture of like, you do something, you get hurt a little bit, you learn not to do it again. There's kind of this like, almost like a chutzpah, kind of like, rough you up a little, which I think is good in a lot of cases. I think though that when it comes to anxiety, there's a lot of moments kind of growing up where I would have anxiety, I would voice my anxiety, and there was kind of this, well, just get over it, like it's all in your head. And I think I had to unlearn that and say like, it's okay to feel that emotion and to acknowledge that emotion. Because I think a lot of times we kind of push it away and you say like, no, toughen up, like deal with it, just compartmentalize. Sometimes that's just not possible. And I think I would get really hard on myself when that wasn't possible. And I would say like, something's wrong with me. When really it was just that I wasn't acknowledging. If I just acknowledged the emotion, it would have been so much easier. So that was the first one. The American ego one is an interesting one because that was my most controversial article. So that's interesting that you brought that up. That has been a lifelong journey, I think. I grew up also, a lot of my family's in the military. So very patriotic. I was also taught that women and men were treated the same in business. And you were like, you're not going to have any special treatment being a woman in business, being a white woman in business. Like, you should just go into it thinking you're going to be treated the same. And I did. And then I got to college and I was like, oh, heck no, this is not the same. And so I think that was kind of a revelation for me. But then what was really a revelation was seeing all the intersections of how people were treated different in this context that I viewed very non-emotional. Because a lot of times when I'm at work, I'm very like execution oriented. So I'm not super like at the end of the day, when I'm in a meeting, I'm like, okay, what's going down with this? What are the numbers on here? You know, I'm very quantitative. And so I was like, why are people being treated differently in a context that's so execution oriented? Like, why does this matter if I'm a woman or a man? If I'm telling you that something needs to be done, shouldn't it just be done because it needs to be done, not because it's coming from me? And so I think I had to unlearn the idea that we all were kind of treated equally, and that wasn't a thing anymore. And that it was a thing, and that there was intersectionals of that. And you know, I've been in a room where I, as a white woman, was listened to more than my friend who is a Black woman, and having to sort of navigate that and learn how to navigate that when I was sort of brought up saying, like, don't view race as a thing, don't view gender as a thing. If you view it as a thing, you're making it a thing. And I was like, well, that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of subconscious thoughts and actions that go into sort of that dynamic, and you have to acknowledge those in order for there to be change. So I had to unlearn that. Let's see, what was the third one?
The man's world.
The man's world, God bless. Yeah, so the man's world thing, kind of going back to the privilege thing, I think also that was a big revelation when I started going into tech. So early on in college, I didn't necessarily want to do the influencer thing. I wanted to work for like Apple and Facebook, and all those companies, like every like college freshman. And so I worked at a tech incubator, and I realized that we were starting to bring in a lot of students because they were like in the same frats, and that there was very much like this mentality of like, bring in my friend, you bring in your friend, which is all fine and dandy. But then I realized that there was like 4 girls out of like 30. And I was like, wait a second, like this is, no. I don't think this is how we should be doing it. And I remember I voiced my opinion, and I got sort of kickback from it, and being like, Natalie, don't make gender a thing. And it kind of goes back to that you have to acknowledge something in order for it to change. You can't sit there and pretend like it doesn't exist. Because ultimately that just perpetuates the cycle and says like, this is okay, what's going on, this isn't a problem. So I think that was kind of what I had to unlearn. Also, I just had to be really comfortable with the fact that sometimes people are going to disagree with me. I got a chance to meet Gloria Steinem at USC, which was a very big moment for me. But I asked her, I was like, you know, in today's age, women still struggle with being both liked and heard. Like, how do you navigate that? And she's like, I just don't care about being liked sometimes. There are some people who have really terrible opinions that are very hurtful to other people. If they don't like me, that's saying a good thing about my opinions. That's saying that I'm standing up for what's right. I think that was something that I definitely had to sort of grow into as sort of I progressed throughout college.
I have one last thing that I wanted to ask you to share with the audience, and then we're going to open it up for the co-hosts. If anyone else has another question or comment or conversation, they're just going to continue on. One piece of it, you're a student. I think you're the first student that we've had on the show. So to other students, what's one piece of advice that you could tell them specifically that they should make sure that they're doing for the future? Just anything in general.
Well, I think they can kind of learn from my mistakes a little bit, in that when I was a student, I was crippled by that title. Like, I thought the only things that I could ever do as a student was be an intern and write for publications that would accept my stuff for free. Like, I always thought, oh, well, they're never going to let a student do something and, you know, be the student. They're never going to, you know, be they're never going to give that student a try because I was crippled by that title. We have to stop thinking like that. Like last semester, I hosted with a bunch of other students a meetup at the Staples Center with the LA Clippers. And that was one of those things where I was like, if I still viewed myself as just a student, this would have never happened. Like I would have told myself, no, they're going to let somebody who's more experienced do this. They're never going to let a bunch of like 19 and 20-year-olds host this thing at the Staples Center. We have to stop viewing ourselves as one-dimensional. I struggled with this in high school as well. I thought I was like the smart girl. I never thought I was pretty. I never thought that I was flirty. I never thought that I had anything other than that one thing. And students do that as well. They're like, I'm just a student. That's my one dimension. And we have to start thinking of ourselves as multi-dimensional people. It's okay to want to do things like host events at the Staples Center, like, you know, write for publications like Forbes and really big things. Because once we sort of start to think that we can, that's when we start to actually do it. We have to be able to think that it's attainable in order for us to go out and do it. So I think that's my biggest thing to students, is to stop viewing yourself as just a student, start thinking more multi-dimensionally.
I think that's a great reason, and just the way that you articulated that clearly demonstrates why you're a LinkedIn top voice.
Oh gosh, oh, that title.
Had to rub that one in. So we're gonna open it up for the co-hosts. If anyone has any other questions or things that they want to circle back to, or even just ask Natalie in general, just give them a couple of minutes, Natalie, and then if nothing comes up, we'll flip the script and the floor will be all yours then.
Awesome.
I did have a question on something that you just touched on, kind of about, well, essentially it just goes back to like sexism, right? And how if we don't talk about these topics, then, you know, how is anything going to change? But then there's also this other side that you'll see like blasted in the media and by people who play on sexism and racism and things like that. You know what I mean? Because I was just having this conversation with someone, just because for me, I don't think like, oh, this person is a different color, or they're from a different country, or they're this or they're that. The only time that I do is when someone points it out to me and I'm like, why is that relevant whatsoever? Unless we're specifically talking about that. So I guess, how do you walk that fine line? Because you seem to have a pretty good grasp on it. I mean, as far as with the topic that you just discussed. So how do you walk that fine line?
Yeah, I think that was a learning process. Like I've definitely made mistakes while talking about it. And I think if I have one piece of advice, is it's okay to make mistakes when talking about it, just to know that you're still learning and that you need to kind of rid yourself of that ignorance. To answer your question more specifically though, I think it's one of those things where I don't necessarily talk about it unless it's relevant, like you, where, so like a good example of this is like, so a good example that I rarely talk about unless it comes up is like, I'm a member of the LGBT community. I like never really talk about it because it never comes up and it's not really something that's like relevant, right? Because it just doesn't come up. But it's one of those things that when I do see that somebody has made a comment or they, so like a lot of times this will happen because people will say like, oh, you can bring a +1, you can bring like your boyfriend. And I'm like, oh, like boyfriend or girlfriend. Yeah, totally. Like I'll like give like a little like, it's a both, but that's okay. It's one of those things where you want to bring up when it's relevant, but you also don't want to be silent in it. So there is kind of this fine line of doing it in a respectful way of just being like, hey, just so you know, like I'm actually bisexual. Like if you can use both pronouns, that would be really inclusive. You don't have to, but like if you want to, that'd be nice. I have that privilege though of also being like, if somebody says boyfriend, that's totally acceptable. You know, like I'm not necessarily, I'm not in a situation where it's only one or the other. When it comes to stuff like race, that's really hard to talk about, like, especially as a white person. Like scientifically, white people get more anxious talking about race than any other race. And we kind of don't know how to navigate it and stuff like that. Kind of going back to my point of, you can't be the person to tell someone else about their culture. that's really important. And I think that the people that I get and I get sort of hardest on and I make the most comments to are other white people. Because I'm never going to sit there and tell a person of color, like, no, you can't do something. No, this is actually how it is. Because I'm not the one experiencing what it's like to be a person of color. They are. So I think that was kind of one of those moments where I had to take a step back, because there was a moment where I did that early on in my college career. And I said, well, isn't it this way? And they were like, no, Natalie, but you also have to realize, like, you didn't live this. Like, why would you question it? Why wouldn't you just accept the fact that what I'm saying is true? And it's fine to question, but you need to learn how to do it in such a way where you're respecting that other person's story. And you're saying, I'm not telling you that you don't know how to be this way. I'm just confused. Can you help me with this? I think that's how I've sort of approached it more, of admitting my own faults and being like, hey, like, I don't necessarily, like the trans community. I've been like, I don't necessarily understand the trans community. I don't understand like where they're coming from. Can you help me out with this? Can you help me to understand and kind of see your perspective? That's kind of how I've been able to navigate in such a way, but also learn the verbiage that they want me to use, the moments that they want me to step in, because your role isn't necessarily to come in as like the woke white girl and be like, I know everything. That's just awful. No one likes that. And so I think it's better to be quieter, but when you do voice up, admit the fact that you don't know everything about the situation, but you're curious, you want to know more, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is honoring the other person.
That's amazing advice. Like, can we just like vote for you for president?
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna ask, would you ever consider running for office?
Yeah, it would be like Riso 2050. It would be best.
Yes.
I'll be voting.
2050. Absolutely.
So Natalie, it looks like no other questions from the co-hosts. The floor is all yours. You're welcome to ask away. It can be one person, two people, all of us, whatever you'd like to do. It's all yours for the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Awesome. So I was watching this live stream with Tim Salau and Quentin alums the other day. And there was a bunch of questions. It was in Tim's mentors and mentees Facebook page. And one of the questions that came up, which I'm kind of curious to hear from you guys, because I don't necessarily have a good perspective on this, mostly for my age. But they asked, and it was interesting because both of them are really young too, but they asked, if you could teach your kid one lesson about life and one lesson about career, what would those two lessons be? I'm curious, Sunny in particular, I don't know who else has kids, if anybody else does, or if anybody else also has opinions on this. But I think that's a really interesting perspective and a really interesting question that obviously I'm 21, I don't have that perspective, but I would love to hear kind of your answers to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first because you called me out. And everyone on this show does have at least a child. So the parent, which was odd because I don't think we really knew that when we created the show. It just happened to work out like that. So the question is, one thing that I could teach my child or children that they should know about professional and personal life, right?
Yeah, so one about life, one about career.
I'm a fan of 3, I'll give you 3. No. So I will kind of distill it down into, the 3 things. Like I've worked really hard to kind of hone the craft of the messaging I share on LinkedIn, and that's because it's from me. So, that focus, collaboration, and inspiration. I think for me personally, that personal and that professional thing, the whole reason I started with LinkedIn video with was our whole intent was to show the world through the eyes of And so the one thing that I'm sharing is that perspective is everything. And so professional or personal, I want him and other kids that come along to know that, that focus doesn't matter if it's professional or personal life. Like, just be authentic, be who you are. That's what your focus should always be, is just stay true to yourself. the collaboration piece of it is you can't do anything by yourself. I mean, and I qualify that with, yes, at the end of the day, you know, it's on you to make those life decisions, but the people that you surround yourself with, I mean, those are the people that you learn from. And I think you referenced something about always learning. I'm trying to look like revelations, right? So it's about lessons and revelations. So that collaboration piece is the people that you surround yourself with are the people that are either going to elevate you or they're going to drag you down. And so that's what I mean by success with others or success through others. And then inspiration is, I mean, you probably hear this all the time, like, you know, do what you love. And yeah, there's sense in that. But I think the inspired piece is, I want, in this case, right, I want him to know that I want his life to be more meaningful than mine. And I got a pretty meaningful life, right? But I want him to be able to live life experiences and to be a better version of me and a better version of himself, right? And you talk about impact, right? So that inspiration is to make an impact on others. So fans of three, but that's that one thing, is all three of those things tied together.
Wow, that's awesome, man. You're talking about me being president? Come on now. That's amazing.
Okay, so I know you called out Sunny, but I know mine. And the two things. So number one, and these go into both personal and professional. Number one, show up. Like, from every person that I've like talked to that I have been like, this person is success. It's so funny because I'll talk to them and they're like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but I show up and good stuff happens, you know? And so that's just been like the theme of my life here lately, is just showing up. So that, and then the last one would be here now. So I picked that up from Ram Dass, like how many ever years ago. And like, everything good is happening right now. You know, we get so caught up in the past and then the future and what's going to happen and this and that. And like, I realized even like through my daughter's almost 6 now, and there's still points that I like want to cry because I'm like, shit, I feel like I missed it, you know, with certain parts. And so I need to take my own advice, and like all the good stuff that you're searching for, and you go out and you travel the world, like everything that you're looking for is like right here and right now. So that would definitely be it.
Yeah, I can answer that too, I guess. I would tell my daughter, I have a daughter too, that never to make choices for other people. Like, don't live your life for anyone other than what's best for you, because I think you can fall into that trap, whether it's relationship, your parents, you know, anybody else who's influencing you to make decisions, when really it's about yourself. Like, and that's the fastest way to lose your own voice. And that happened to me. And so like, I don't want that to happen to her, where you wake up one day and your 10 years is gone and you're like, what the hell happened? Like, so that would be mine.
That's really interesting. I kind of want to comment on that because I had not the reverse, but a similar dynamic happened between my father and I when I graduated. And like I said, the Italian American father. And I said, you know, Dad, like, are you proud? Like, are you proud that I'm like graduating today? And he was like, well, yeah, duh. And I was like, no, but like, because I'm like trying to like kind of get the like, are you proud out of him? You know, like, just say that you're like proud of me. And he was like, but Natalie, you shouldn't be searching for me just to say that I'm proud of you. Like, that shouldn't be why you do things. Like, you should do them because you want to do them. And so it's interesting because I kind of had that dynamic with my father recently, of my dad being like, I'm always going to be proud of you, whether I say it or not, but you have to do things not searching for other people's approval, but because you genuinely are finding contentment out of what you're doing. Like, I want you to go to USC because you liked USC, not because it was a big school in our town and everybody knew it. So I totally empathize with what you just said. That's super awesome.
I think I have a little boy. He's 4. He just turned 4, and he's my everything. And I would have to tell him something that I'm trying every single day to focus on, and that's self-worth. Knowing that no matter what you've been through, no matter what questionable things you've ever done, no matter how many mistakes you've made, or how many, if you have a disease or a chronic condition, it doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make your self-worth go down at all. Knowing that you're always worth so much more than you'll ever know. That's my biggest piece.
That's awesome. That's so good. I love that.
And I have to follow that. So how do I do that? Mine's a little bit less deep than that, but kind of one of the things you said, Natalie, was curiosity is a big thing for me, because I think it takes you a lot of places in life that open up conversations that you would never have otherwise on a lot of different levels, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual. All those things open up when you're willing to listen and be curious and truly want to know how other people think and feel. And I think that's just such an important aspect that I would love for my kids, that I'm really, really drawing my kids into on as many levels as I can. And then the second part of it is to have integrity. And integrity, I think, means a lot of things to a lot of people. It's kind of one of those words I feel like we've kind of lost. But I think it's more than being true to yourself. I think it's being true to what you know is right. And how you get there, clearly everyone has a different way of getting there. But I think if you don't anchor in what you have discovered and centralize on and put a stake in the ground to, this is who I am and this is what I believe is right, and spend most of your life trying to stick to that or improve that, then a lot of the other things that happen will just take care of themselves, because you're being you and you're doing your best to listen, but be true to yourself. So that's my tube.
That's awesome. I was talking with another LinkedIn person, Sam Park. He's like 19. He's another like really young one. But we were talking about how important core values were to us, and how he's just started to kind of make money for the first time, and he's already planning on giving some of it back to his parents. And I remember thinking like, gosh, that's so rare to like meet someone like that, especially at my age, that has that integrity that you were talking about and has like core values. And I think, kind of to add to your point, that's something that I've been focusing on surrounding myself with, is other people like that who have that integrity and have those core values, and also people who know my core values and can keep me aligned on that. I think that's one of the things that my own parents have done really well. If not to brag about my own parents, but my own parents have done a really good job of saying like, of calling me out in the moments that I have kind of swayed from those values and been like, no, you have to hold certain things true. Like my mom works at a nonprofit. She's like, you cannot be greedy. Like you cannot sit there and worship money and think you can pay for people with money. So I think that's awesome that you're doing that. That's something that my own parents have done that I think has been really pivotal in me making sure that I stayed on the right track.
Well, Natalie, on behalf of all of the co-hosts, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, to say the least. We all wish you the best, and if there's anything any of us can do to help you in your journey, or if there's just, even if it's a sounding board, whatever it might be, don't hesitate. Just reach out to us, and we'd love to help you to continue on your journey, or even if there's something that you think that we can bring to benefit you or even others in your network. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you guys. This has been such a privilege. I'm like fans of all of you guys, so this has been awesome.
Awesome.